Joe, I got my briefing notes, so I'll only be 2 minutes, okay?
Perfect.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.
Hello. Great. Good evening, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, thank you for joining us here today in the German Pavilion. My name is Stephen Nolan, and I'm with the UNDP, and it's a real thrill to be here with you today. At its heart, this project will be developing new economic analysis to show the sustainable development and economic growth benefits of adopting robust, ambitious and actionable NDCs and how they can be achieved. And we're delighted to be collaborating with the OECD on this. And it's great to see Joe for the second time today. It's the craziness of COP, but great to see you again, Joe. As I said, we're excited to partner with the OECD in this project. And this project will support the current push for ambitious and implementation in NDCs by highlighting the economic and social opportunities of an ambitious and just transition. UNDP, with its extensive country network, we operate in 170 countries and territories, is supporting numerous governments working on this agenda. And this unique UNDP and OECD partnership will go further by anchoring NDCs in the real economy to unlock the finance, investment and underlying governance structures needed to support the development and delivery of ambitious new national commitments. So in closing, it's been a long day, it's been a long few days. I feel like I've been here for months, but it's been very pleasurable, and today has been a fantastic day in terms of the insights and spending some time with our administrator. It is about partnerships, it is about collaboration, and I think, again, if I may, Joe, this collaboration with the OECD and the UNDP, two big mega institutions, and together with the partners in this room, we should be able to do a lot more. So thank you, Joe, and I'll hand over to Joe. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you all for your presence here today. Thank you, panelists, for joining me on the stage here. We are going to have a panel discussion shortly. I'm going to set the scene a little bit before we get started, and look forward to, I know it's been the end of a long day, so really thank you for coming along this evening. In our view, this is a really important and timely conversation on unlocking finance and investment to deliver ambitious NDCs. Well, of course, countries are due to put forward their next NDCs, nationally determined contributions, by February next year, and finance is, of course, a critical enabler for high ambition NDCs and for ensuring they're in fact delivered after they're put on the table. But finance is also one of the main obstacles facing middle income and developing economies when it comes to implementing their current climate commitments. So how to effectively mobilise private investment at scale is one of the key questions facing governments as they prepare these new NDCs. And strong private sector action will inevitably play a pivotal role in mobilising finance and supporting delivery. But first, let me remind you what's at stake here. You probably don't want to hear how dangerously close we are to crossing the 1.5 degree temperature guardrail. In fact, you know, the suggestion is we're certainly at 1.45 already, and possibly at that 1.5 limit. as we hit new climate records year after year, and the devastating impacts of our warming world intensify across all regions, all continents, governments are acutely aware of the consequences of insufficient action. However, this awareness has failed to drive the necessary transformations of our economies and systems, and we know that greenhouse gas emissions continue to reach new highs. It's been calculated that even if the current NDCs are fully implemented, they would only reduce greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 by an estimated 10%, and that's against the 43% that's needed if we're going to keep within 1.5 degrees, meaning that that would lead to predictions of up to 2.6 degrees of global warming. We know how bad it is now. 2.6 degrees is really hard to fathom. Too many countries are holding back on more ambitious climate action. And the narrative that ambitious action may hinder economic growth is still really entrenched in many parts of the world. And today, against a backdrop of dramatic economic changes and a politically turbulent world, it's proving harder for governments to keep their eye on the climate ball. There are growing concerns about the impact of climate action on energy security, trade fragmentation, competitiveness in both OECD and non-OECD countries alike. And for many middle-income and developing economies, accessing and attracting finance and investment in a context of rising sovereign debt burdens and very high costs of capital is a super significant hurdle. Now, at the same time, the business case for the transition is strong, as the costs for several key transition technologies have plummeted, and there's now a real solid business case for investing in clean energy technologies. Investments and changes in the clean energy sector are opening new business and growth opportunities with the potential to create millions of jobs. Now, across the OECD, we've calculated that 20% of the workforce is now employed in green-driven occupations, and that's compared to about 7% of the workforce in greenhouse gas intensive sectors. A number of countries are implementing green industrial strategies with the hope of developing new sources of growth and creating jobs. So in the face of these headwinds currently, what would give governments the confidence to put forward ambitious new NDCs and support their subsequent delivery? So these next NDCs are crucial for delivering the transformational change we need to enhance societal well-being and secure a sustainable, equitable future for all. It's more than just a climate imperative. So that's why the OECD has been very pleased to team up with UNDP and with the support of the Federal Foreign Office of Germany to bring together this new project to make the strong case for the economic and social benefits of ambitious NDCs and how they can be delivered. So we aim to provide updated evidence of the benefits of climate ambition for people, for economies, and for the planet. It's also going to focus on how ambitious NDCs can be translated into action with effective whole-of-government approaches. I think that's super important. Inclusive stakeholder engagement and credible investment plans to unlock the needed finance and investment. So to successfully deliver NDCs, we're going to need to mobilise substantial financial resources both domestically and internationally. NDCs are useful tools for understanding a country's overall climate ambition and the direction of travel, but most don't have much detail on how they're going to be delivered in practice. And providing more detailed information, whether in the NDC or alongside it, including at the sectoral level, alongside robust costings and strategies to mobilise financing from different sources, can really build confidence that NDCs are achievable. So in the discussion today, we're keen to explore private sector views on what they need to see in the next NDCs to make them more attractive investment opportunities and the critical levers for mobilising private finance at scale to support their delivery. So, with that scene setter, let's get started, and I'd now like to turn to our panellists to share their perspective on the role of the private sector in the NDC process. So I'm going to start with the, God, I've got bits of paper all over the place now. Start with the UN Global Compact. No, hang on, who have I got here for? Let me look at another page. I'm going to start with Sarah Edmondson, who is the head of global advocacy at the Fortescue Metals Group. And Sarah, very keen to hear how you think NDCs can be better connected to ongoing efforts in the real economy, and what, in your view, and this is an interesting question, we talk about investable NDCs, but what does that mean?
There we go. Hello and good evening. Well, I'm going to actually talk about personal experience. Many of you might know that Fortescue is now no longer Fortescue's Metals Group, but just Fortescue. We're going through a major transformation from being just a mining company to a leading energy, technology, and mining company, fully green. And our journey started about 5 years ago, and we've had quite a few different experiences in both the developed as well as the developing world. I think with the NDCs, the original intention was that an NDC was going to be an investment plan or a developing plan, as the case may have it, and it was going to be underwritten by either existing legislation or forthcoming legislation. And that legislative piece is critical. It seems obvious, but it's very difficult, as we know, to actually execute. And it would also imply that we're going to be building. That means we need room. We need to build infrastructure. We need to build renewable energy, which is a broad acre play. And that means we need a lot of space. And I think this is where we often find that actually executing the NDCs can be really challenging. I believe it was the UN Secretary General last year mentioned that one of the biggest threats to meeting our climate targets was permitting, and that's the point that I want to get to. And I'll start actually with some examples in the developing world. In the developed world, forgive me. So we have numerous projects in Australia, and if you're a mining company in Australia, you already qualify for projects of strategic importance to the government. And what that means is that your state, so your federal, as well as your regional, your state government, permitting processes can happen at the same time. So there's no cutting corners. We're always holding up to the best gold standard, but they can happen in parallel as opposed to in sequence. And that can ultimately take 12 months or more off your project. That is obviously, in terms of being able to accelerate and more easily finance, is a very positive thing. That does not exist for green energy right now in Australia. And that is something that we've been pushing for quite aggressively. If this is going to be a transformational investment opportunity for your country, these need to be projects of strategic importance. But another example in the developing world, actually in Brazil, one of our largest projects is it's a green fuels project, green ammonia, $5 billion US. And in Brazil, it was actually the regional government that had spoken to the federal government and said, we want development. And they had already coordinated with a lot of the renewable energy players and said, we're going to need a lot more renewable energy. It's in the Ceará state up in northwest Brazil. And they had spoken to their universities and academia and said, we're going to be bringing these new alternative energies and alternative fuel projects to Ceará state, so we need to be ready. And so this is a project that's been with an ongoing development with the last 3 years. And we have received phenomenal support from the local governments. We've had more town meetings with this project than any other project, but they've all gone extremely well because the level of coordination and intention that goes into these town meetings. We've had academia step up to help us on European certification. No one's certified these green fuel projects before. Is it going to be, or will it be RFNBO qualified? It was actually the Sarah State University that came to us and said, we'll work with you on this. Let's do a pilot. And we'll be able to help fully support. So it's been an extraordinary example of how ideally it would be that legislation and that real coordination that's already that prior planning, but even sometimes just the real intentions and the I guess the extra effort that can be put in can also start facilitating. So to me, to us, to Fortescue, the NDCs are going to be accelerated at a point in time when those NDCs are backed by that true intention to be able to execute. Understanding that, again, we're going to need space, we're going to need permits, we'll be using resources. So there's going to be pulls on either side, but for a net positive result. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Sarah. And I think it's, this is not so much stuff that is in the NDC itself, but it's the supporting framework. You're correct. There's a large number of countries that have net zero commitments, but much smaller number of them have actually put that into legislation. And a really good point about the permitting and having that.
We call it removing the red and green tape.
Exactly. Removing the red tape for a green outcome. Okay, I'm going to turn to Fiona now. Fiona Duggan is Senior Manager Global Sustainability at Unilever. And it's going to be a similar sort of question to you. What signals do you think businesses need to see in NDCs and related documents? So I'm spreading out a little bit further then. And I'd like your view too on what you think makes an NDC investable.
Sure. So to set the context, Unilever has a very strong, stretching climate targets. And we have this down in our Climate Transition Action Plan. It's been signed off by our shareholders. So we have a mandate to cut our emissions fast. And so we are investing. We've got 150 million decarbonisation. We've got a 1 billion climate and nature fund. So we're working hard in our operations. But that's all well and good. But we won't get to where we need to be unless we see a step change across the board. So we were thinking, okay, well, if we need to see catalytic new policies and regulations, where should we be looking? And we said, the NDCs. This could be one of the most important policy documents of this century. We need to know, what does this look like? And so you asked me the question, what does good look like? So we commissioned a report with Patricia Espinosa to work out what does a good and effective NDC look like for Unilever. And I kind of want to say that when we did it, we were kind of delighted. We were like, oh, look at this. This is really good stuff. We should share this. We should talk about it. We did. We did a lot of social media. We did a lot of hosting with governments. We said, this is what a good and effective NDC looks like for Unilever. But we're not the only ones saying what does a good and effective NDC look like for business, actually. And I think it's really important to say this, not just Unilever saying this. We've got a massive coalition of We Mean Business behind it. WBCSD are talking about it. And there's a lot of similarities, actually, in what we're asking for as well. I just came from an NDC partnership meeting, and they were saying pretty much the same thing as I was saying. So what I'm trying to get across here is that Unilever is not unique in what we're asking for. There's a lot of businesses who are also asking for these type of NDCs. So let me tell you, what does a good and effective NDC look like for Unilever? Again, every NDC will be different. It has different opportunities and challenges. So I'll just talk through some of the umbrella asks that we have. Of course, we've got very specific asks that will help us cut our emissions, but you need to have the proper framework as well. So it's been a long day. Normally I do this off the top of my head, but I am tired now, so I'm going to read this from my list if that's okay. So very, very importantly, strive for the highest level of ambition. What do I mean by that? It has to be 1.5 aligned. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're trying to do in our Climate Transition Action Plan. As Sarah was saying, it needs to provide that policy framework so that supports business decarbonisation. Now, every country will be different, but again, I came from a talk at the Pakistan Pavilion, and I was talking through what Unilever in Pakistan needs to scale up their solar and renewable power. So again, it's very kind of simple, straightforward stuff, but every country will be slightly different. We need to identify the links between NDC goals and mitigation, adaptation, key climate strategies and policy instruments. So again, a very clear timeline. When we're going through our planning and budgeting, we're saying, okay, What month would that be? What would that look like exactly? How will we find out about that? Just really clear timelines is what we need, and really clear clarity on the goals and targets. We need to understand how they will be measuring success of an NDC. So what are your monitoring frameworks? What will we be asked to input into? What's really important for us to know is coming up? Implement robust carbon pricing mechanisms. This is very important. And implement ambitious national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And I think importantly for us as a corporate is to require the public disclosure of 1.5 aligned, science-based and independently verified climate transition action plans. So there are a couple of things that we're asking for what does a good and effective NDC look like. Again, I'd love to stand up here and say we're unique, we're different, we're the only people asking for this. But actually, I think it's really important that governments know that they have confidence and cover from progressive businesses to say, go harder, go faster. I say that, and then when I step off the stage, a government minister or a government policy maker will come to me and say, that's all well and good, but what's your skin in the game as well? So I think as a business, we have to really show the investments that we're making, what we're thinking about doing, to say, actually, no, we really do want you to share our climate ambition, and if you do, investment will follow. So I think that's quite important.
No, thanks very much for that. Super quick follow-up question, and that is how many, well, you don't have to give me a number, but what sort of proportion of the current NDCs that have been submitted and are being implemented, what proportion do you think kind of go close to meeting those requirements from Unilever? And it's good, incidentally, that you aren't alone in asking for this. It would be a pretty dreadful thing if every business was asking for something different.
Well, I think it's only fair because the report came out in March, so it's not fair to point fingers at people who did their work beforehand. So what we're trying to do now is to say, you're writing the NDC now, meet with us, meet with fellow progressive businesses in country. We're hosting events. We hosted one in New York Climate Week to say, your last one may not have been aligned with this, and we know that we're not the most important people in the world. NDCs have to be they have to follow a just transition. Youth need a voice, civil society need a voice. But we will be saying over the next couple of months, this is what we're looking for. So I couldn't possibly put a percentage on it, but instead, I'll set maybe a goal or a target. Let's get it to maybe 70% by this time next year.
Very good. That's lots of conversations you have to have, I think. Now, and my next question is to Sherry Madeira, who is the CEO of CDP, and thank you for joining us today. So, question for you is, what do the next round of NDCs mean for business action and reporting? The question really is, how can transparent data from the private sector support the design and delivery of ambitious NDCs?
Great. Thanks, Joe, and thanks, everyone, for still being here at the end of a very busy day. Sounds like lots going on out there, and hopefully this is food for thought as we move on. CDP is the world's disclosure platform. We've been collecting climate and nature data from non-state actors for 24 years. So, hopefully that's our contribution to thinking about how does the private and the public sector come together at this really critical time to make sure we're joined up. I guess I just reflect first on what an NDC really does. It is a commitment by a government in order to be able to set a target, which we all will look to in terms of true north. But the reality is that they have two things that they can do to fulfill it. The first is their own commitment and their own spending. The other is policy making. That's it. And that's a lot sometimes. And sometimes it's not. So the rest is down to corporates. It's down to non-state actors. It's down to all the rest of the economy in order to fulfill the pledge that countries are making. So it's absolutely critical to be able to understand what the requirement is, and I think we've heard really well from the panel already about being able to step up and commit, because without those non-state actors, we are actually asking for something that's a great big question mark as to what things are. Now, with that being said, we have a lot of data already. So if you set a target the next thing you need to do is to set a baseline. So find out from your market, not only your champions, not only those companies that are actually headquartered in your jurisdiction, but all those companies that are doing business within your borders. So that may be a factory, that may be a supply chain that's working within your borders, that may be something that they've invested. They all need to be brought into this. So we need not only corporate level data, but we need location specific data in order to create that baseline. And the good news is we have that. Well, we have that for 2/3 of the world's market cap, about 25,000 companies in 130 different countries around the world. So it's a good start. We're certainly not all there, and we're hopefully going to drum up more and more transparency. But as companies start thinking about what do you use that data for, it is access to capital, it's their own business efficiencies, it's compliance, and it should also be their contribution to the NDCs. So again, I'm not sure if that's completely joined up yet. I know it's not, but we're seeing really good indications that that's starting to happen. CDP has been approached by, for example, Brazil, who has actually published their NDCs, and they were asking for this baseline. Because if you've got a target and you've got a baseline, then you've actually got the ability to talk about a transition plan, not only to the public on a stage, but to the companies and to the stakeholders in the economy, and understand together how it is that you're going to move forward. And so that hand over here I was waving about policy, all of a sudden that starts getting targets. You get to map it, you get to measure it, and of course, if you can measure it, you can manage it. And you can course correct along the way. Because some of these targets are a little bit far out, and we don't have time to waste. So I think that this is actually where that private sector contribution is not just a nice to have. It's absolutely essential. And if we start thinking about the plus side, because I think, Joe, it was sobering how you started this panel, and that's actually important for us to bed in. It's also important for us to think about the upside. And one of the things the CDP has been collecting is the numbers that companies have been assessing in terms of the opportunity for their growth within a sustainable future. So their own targets, how is it that they can invest to change their business models in order to be able to create upside from where they are now? And that number is $16.1 trillion. That is a huge amount of opportunity that has been identified. The question is, how do we finance that? And again, that comes back to our Finance Day conversations, I think, today. But it really does shed a light that, what we're collecting from companies is not just Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions data, governance data, targets. It's also that opportunity for investment. And that's something I think that fits into countries' development plans, which are an important partner of the NDCs. So I'll leave it there.
Well, thanks very much for that. And as a data-driven organisation, that's music to my ears. But equally important to be stressing the baseline and where you can go from there. One thing I'm sort of struck by is that if we're talking about NDCs as an economic opportunity for government, which is what we want to do through this project, there's some really interesting and potentially good synergies with the business opportunities you've just been talking about there. So hopefully we'd be able to put these two together to be mutually supportive.
I would hope so. And actually, if we don't, I think that there is a risk. The glass is half full, or is it half empty? If governments aren't speaking to the companies and the corporations, the organizations within their borders, other governments may be doing so. And that becomes that worry, I think, that governments maybe aren't talking about too much. But there could be a policy arbitrage situation that might go on in the future. And actually, that doesn't solve anything. We are talking about a global climate crisis. The borders are there so that actually you can take ownership of the economies that you're responsible for as a government. But certainly, you want to be able to be very transparent about reaching out and creating an incentive, this stick as well as the carrot. And if that's clear, we see that businesses are leaning in, and as long as they know where the government is going with policy, they become an incredible partner. So that's the piece I think we just need to think about. The glass is half full and the glass is half empty.
Okay, I think definitely the glass needs to be half full this time of the evening, for sure. Thank you. Now, next to Ariana Griffa, who is Senior Global Policy Manager at IIGCC, and going to focus now on institutional investors and what they need to see in NDCs and related documents to inform decision-making from your perspective.
Thank you, Joe, and thanks again to UNDP and OECD for the invite to be here this evening. Just for context, for those less familiar with the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, we're a membership organization. We work with institutional investors, asset managers, asset owners, counting over 400 members across 27 countries and representing over $65 trillion US dollars in asset under management. We work with institutional investors to help them set targets, engage with investee companies, and engage with policymakers to make sure that those trillions are actually shifted towards net zero, resilient, and nature positive investments. So I just wanted to add to what you said, Joe, about the opportunities. There are opportunities for governments, there are opportunities for businesses, but most importantly, these are investment opportunities for large investors like institutional investors. We know that investors are looking for opportunities across sectors, across different technologies, and we know that the net zero transition is going to offer those opportunities. However, these are not at the moment communicated through their NDCs. Most importantly, we have worked with some of our members earlier this year to understand how useful, if at all, NDCs are to institutional investors. And they are definitely useful to communicate the overarching headline level of the decarbonization ambition of a country. However, to be actually useful to investors to understand where the opportunities lie, they need to be a lot more granular. They really need to emphasize how the transition is going to look like across different sectors, and where do we see the private sectors coming in and financing those opportunities. So you've mentioned additional documents as well. We're not saying that NDCs could be everything, but at the moment, right now, is a really huge opportunities for some of those countries that in the past, as Fiona said, maybe they have not thought about the whole economy transition. But they have an opportunity now to think about the next NDCs as the wider whole economy transition. And this means looking across all sectors, looking across all technologies, and also working collaboratively across governments and across the private sector to identify those opportunities. By working with our members, we understood sort of what are the sort of key themes that the NDCs could send signals to identify those opportunities. We mentioned sectoral pathways. This is not just a useful exercise for the government to really understand where do they see themselves in that specific sectors, particularly looking at sectors that are really important for the economy of the specific countries. Again, NDCs are nationally determined, so the specific opportunities are going to match the ambition and also the development and growth ambition of a country as well. But these pathways need to be underpinned by policy and regulatory frameworks that will get us there. And this is helpful not just to give credibility to the plan, to give confidence to investors that these plans are going to be implemented, but also help investors understand whether the investees' companies' transition plan are also credible, if they have taken into account the policy frameworks and the policy trajectory when they think about their own climate strategies as well. As Fiona mentioned, we're not the only ones saying it's very great to see that these messages are very much reiterated across the private sectors, from businesses, from investors, from the great organizations such as the NDC partnership as well. However, NDCs do need to be accompanied by investment strategies and financing strategies as well. And not because NDCs are investment plans per se, but they're, again, a very useful exercise to really think about where the sources of finance are going to come from, particularly in emerging markets and developing economies, where the sources of finance might not be necessarily on the public side of things, but might come from international climate finance, might come from like EMDEs as well. And this is very important for investors to understand whether there's opportunities to co-develop some of those investment opportunities and where they see sort of like themselves. So actually identifying those opportunities is very, very important. And this really leads me to the last point, which I think everyone was really trying to convey, that we need more consultation and collaboration. This, again, is really, really timely opportunities to bring the businesses on board, to bring the investors on board, and trying to understand how the transition is going to look like and where the different actors are going to come in and finance those opportunities. So as I've heard in other panels today, we really need to work together on this.
No, absolutely. Working together, super important, and having those consultative processes. If we say the private sector is critical to fulfilling the NDC commitments, then we've got to work in partnership together for sure. I just have one quick question. Because you talked about NDCs needing to be more granular. And how the transition might look across sectors. But where do you think the balance could or should be? Because these are 10-year, plans or commitments, and a lot can change in that time. So, where do you make that balance between being granular and trying to stuff too much information into an NDC?
Absolutely, I think this is a really fair point, and this also might change depending on, again, the country's sort of capabilities and resources to understand where the sort of short-term, medium-term and long-term opportunities are. What we really specify in our work is that not only thinking about sort of like long-term about the transition, but also thinking about the current macroeconomic context in that specific countries and how that sort of not only drives some of those opportunities, but also change in the future as well. So thinking about sort of employment, skills and capabilities and opportunities, and how can actually, drive, development in a specific industry if you have those skills there, or whether you need to actually develop and work with, academia, etc., to develop that industry in the long term. So I think those opportunities, again, will come from the starting sort of macroeconomic context of the specific country and what can be done sort of sooner based on the natural resources, based on the sort of skills, based on other dependencies like trade-related sort of risk of specific industries. So I think what we hope to see is countries focusing on, the most immediate opportunities, those sectors that can transition faster, and then move on to those opportunities that are harder to reach, where there needs to be a slower transition and development across the economies to get there.
Okay, so picking up again on the earlier point that was made about timelines, a little bit there to space it out or give a sense. Okay. Thank you for waiting. Alfonso, our last panelist, Alfonso Garcia Mora, who's the Vice President for Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean of the IFC, the International Finance Corporation. So the question for you is, how is it going to be possible to effectively mobilise private investment at scale to support the next NDCs, particularly in emerging markets and developing economies? And what coordination mechanisms might be able to help with that?
Thank you for inviting us, and thank you for the question. Actually, I had to give you in the afternoon, I was participating in a panel, and they asked me, imagine you are in 2050 and you live in a livable planet, and you have to tell what you have done to make it happen. What would you say? Which is kind of the same question, but a reverse question. But I like the way that they propose the question, because it's actually quite positive in a way. And we don't look at this theme with a positive perspective. We always look at it from a negative angle, no? So let me come back to the question and thinking on how to frame it in a way that makes sense. So I think that it is actually very much related to what the previous speaker panelist was mentioning. No? So we need $2.4 trillion in emerging markets, right? Annual investments. But we have lots of trillions in assets under management in institutional investors. No? So the key question is, what does it take to move those trillions out of, to some extent, out of sovereign debt in developed countries and bring it to actually climate finance in emerging and developing economies? What is needed, and how can we actually help to make it happen? One point that I think is quite important, 80% of it is supposed to come from private sector. So there is only 20% of these 2.4 trillions that are actually coming from the private sector as of today, and it should be 80%. What we think in the World Bank Group or in IFC that we should do is based on 5 main blocks. No? The first one is enabling reforms. So we know that in emerging markets and developing economies there are many sectors where actually, on the granularity that we were mentioning before, where we need reforms in order to attract this private capital. These markets are not ready to attract the private capital. At the end of the day, private capital will go if they get the return that they need in order to pay the liabilities that they have, or to pay to the savers, or to pay to the pensioners the money that they get. So we need those markets to operate in a way that this equation can actually work. For that is why we actually created in the World Bank Group what we call the CCDRs, the Climate Change Development Reports. Now, we have already done more than 50 countries where we try to identify what are the reforms on the key sectors for NDCs that are needed in order to catalyze or to bring private capital, which is not easy, and we know that there are many resistances. And we talk about sector reforms, we talk about carbon taxation, we talk about mandatory standards. Also, we talk a little bit about a few sets. OECD has also done the same type of research in other countries, and we need to really move in the direction of how to create the incentives to make that happen. I mean, what is the incentive that an MD needs to have in order to make the reforms that in many cases are not the popular ones in a way, or that politically are actually quite complicated to do. I'm thinking on the mining sector, thinking on the energy sector, thinking on many sectors that are not easy. No? So let's assume that we have done it and we have the reforms, which is the first pillar. The second one will be to create standards, sustainable finance standards. No? We have a huge problem globally, and the problem is that we have 50 taxonomies in the world on sustainable finance. So how can we actually mobilize those $60 trillion of assets under management if we don't have an asset class? If what we have is a set of different taxonomies and standards that define many different, or that are supposed to define the same thing, but actually based on different ingredients, or saying differently, that actually are not talking about the same thing. So this is particularly relevant when you think about emerging markets, when you think about small markets where the depth of the market is not there, and that therefore any institutional investor, international institutional investor, need to have enough depth in the market in order to mobilize this capital to those markets, because liquidity is not there. So they will need to invest to maturity, and therefore they will need to have the depth of the market, and they need to have an asset class that is minimum, or that has a minimum volume. No? So this is important, and that's why we are proposing, and we are proposed today to work on interoperability. So even if we don't have the standards, and we will not have the same standards, that's kind of an utopia these days, but at least we need to have interoperability between the taxonomy. So we need to set a minimum common denominator that can give us the space. The third pillar is investment platforms. So we are talking about trillions of dollars. No? I mean, the figures really goes out of my mind. No? This is something that is impossible to achieve by thinking on idiosyncratic on one-by-one transactions. Will never happen. We need to really think about it at a scale. The only way to think about it at a scale is to create platforms, to really standardize, create platforms where we can attract those volumes that we need in order to make it happen. And those platforms are complicated because those platforms are based on standardization on the asset side. And therefore you need to follow the same standards when originating loans, when originating opportunities that you can package, and therefore you can bring it to these platforms that can bring the scale that is needed. No? Number 4, and probably the one that is more complicated during or one that is also very complicated during these days, is concessional finance, blended finance. And why is it important? It's important because we are talking about markets that are not perfect at all. Markets that actually have many risk issues that will not be easy to the risk, or that will not be easy to attract this international capital in order to fill in or to do the investment in those markets. We estimate that we need between $80 to $100 billion a year of blended finance in order to catalyze this private capital. No? This is a lot of money. This is a lot of money in the context of economies and countries where the fiscal space is very limited, and therefore it's very difficult to justify to taxpayers. And we also need to provide blended finance to mobilize private capital. So you need two things here. One, the capital, but you also need to have a good monitoring of this capital to make sure that it is allocated to the right projects, and therefore there is not a rent-seeking or a movement of rents from taxpayers to some shareholders that are not complying with the criteria that you establish. No? So not an easy thing to do. IFC, our experience is that blended finance can mobilize between 8 to 10 times the initial amount that is invested, which is the type of catalytic capital that we need, and we need more catalytic capital. We cannot reach out to the NDCs with investments that are one-to-one. That's impossible. So we need catalytic capital, we need blended finance, we need to have a multiplier effect. And we need MDBs like IFC and others to really play the catalytic role, to really going down into the capital structure, investing more in equity, investing more in mezzanine, and bringing institutional investors to the senior tranches where the risk is lower, and therefore they might have more appetite to bring them in that space. No? But we need to think about it intentionally. So we need to really think on how to create the catalytic capital in order to standardize, replicate, and therefore mobilize at scale. And I would say one last point, which is the fifth one, and you mentioned that because I think it's absolutely critical, is data transparency. So we need data transparency. We need data transparency for many reasons, and that's why we also started sharing the GEMS data in MDBs to really try to demystify as well the expected losses in these markets. No? Expected losses in these markets and in these sectors that, by definition, if you don't have information, you will provide or you will request a higher equity premium. No? And if you have uncertainty, you go to the highest equity premium that you can think. No? So we need data to actually put in context what is the LGD, what are the PDs, by sector, by country, by type of project, that can really help to the risk and to generate the financial modeling that is needed to make it more attractive. So this would be my five Christmas presents that I would like for this season.
Okay, you're very greedy in terms of what you're asking for your Christmas presents, I have to say, because very interesting that some of what you're talking about is possibly country or market specific. A lot of it is about the global financial system, which needs a big overhaul. So, I guess the question is, from an NDC point of view, these are big challenges. Overhauling the global financial system, big challenges. But from an NDC point of view, how can we make a start on things that is going to begin to at least turn the tide and achieve some of the leveraging and shifting of the trillions you have under management towards fulfilling those ambitious NDCs?
So I mean, one thing is that at the end of the day, the global financial system is all of us. So it is not an external agent. No, it's not them. We normally try to think that it's them. No, they have to solve it. No, we have to solve it. We are part of it. And the thing is that by putting ourselves on the thinking about this question from a I perspective, I think that we will probably move faster on the we or on the they, because otherwise what we are just waiting for someone to solve the issues that we need to do. No? But having said that, I believe that the initial objective that we had with the CCDRs, with the climate change development reports, was precisely helping to achieve at the local level, at the national level, how can they actually move in the direction that they have committed. What are the long-hanging fruits? What are the difficult ones? How can they actually establish a timeline, as you were mentioning before, or at least a prioritization? How should you prioritize between the intensity of the impact, I would say, or the volume, the magnitude, and the easiness of doing those reforms or going into or achieve those long-hanging fruits. No? And that debate is important, and you need to structure that debate formally. So you need to have a prioritization in your policy reforms and on the way that you can attract this money. Because otherwise it will be a conceptual a story that is very nice on paper to have a conceptual story, but you need to put legs and arms. So you need to really go at the sector level and think how this, what does it imply and what does it require? No?
Yep. Okay. No, that's a really important clarification. Thank you for that. Now, I think we've finished our questions. Jennifer Morgan is here and was set to make some closing remarks. Are you ready now, or shall we talk amongst ourselves for a little bit? Okay, do it now. Thank you. Thank you, panelists. And over to you, Jennifer, to close us out.
No, thanks so much to everyone here and for the conversation, which is an incredibly important one. And I think it's good to get down into the specifics of what are the experiences that are there for investors, for companies, whether it be around the engagement and the coordination on the engagement of communities, whether it be around the coordination across as well, and the need, what I heard and what I've heard a lot from companies in the last months is just kind of to know where it's going. What's the road ahead? What's the certainty? All of these things. And I'm just trying to think about, why is it so hard to get this conversation to happen on the national level, which is where it needs to happen. It's a political economy conversation that should be society-wide, right? How are we dealing with the risks and the costs of climate change and the impacts, which is fundamentally changing people's lives and changing economies, and then the transformation and the transitions, the just transitions that need to occur. And in some ways, these are national policy discussions. I wonder, I mean, I think we're here at a COP, so we speak about NDCs and we kind of all have our language. But I guess my my thought or my kind of encouragement is to make sure that we all go home and talk about this in language that people understand. Not that you're not doing that, but just as kind of because you all are on the ground. But I don't hear as much in many countries I visit about the economic benefits of moving forward, of business messengers who are on the floor of the parliament that are doing social media, working to get the word out with unusual, perhaps, alliances that happen in national newspapers, that are doing the community meetings, that are listening and moving forward. That's the same, the government has to do the same thing. So it's not, and that I just feel very passionately about, because I think otherwise this remains quite a high-level, untenable, non-inclusive debate for people. And also for some of the policymakers, and also for companies. We have large companies here. There's also so many small, medium-sized enterprises that are part of the solution. So that would be my kind of encouragement here, is keep going, but let's all pay attention to our language, to our accessibility. And I mean, in Germany, we're going to be bringing together across different countries in our embassies, policymakers, large, small size companies from those countries, also other stakeholders, to say, okay, what are we really trying to achieve in this country? What are you trying to achieve in this country? How do we each play our role? What do we need to do as government to get those policies in place? Okay, well, we don't have enough support for legislation yet to get that done and to put it in an NDC.
So how are we going to do that together? And how are we going to listen to each other? I just think listening to each other right now is so important, especially when there's those that are coming with discussions to try and polarize these discussions. So thank you for everything that you are doing, the numbers, the investors, the companies that are here, the finance piece. Let's continue to do this in these conversations, but also just go home, work in the countries, work with your affiliates in those countries, continue to do that, and really pay attention to our language, pay attention to our listening. I'm speaking as much for government as I am for the private sector, and let's build the bridges. Let's build the bridges, because the bridges are falling from climate change impacts. They need to be resilient and stable into the future that we're building together. Thank you, and thank you to the OECD and UNDP as well for all you're doing.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sherry, Ariana, Alfonso, Sarah, and Fiona. Really appreciated the insights you've brought this evening. A lot to think about, and we will take this all on board as we take the project forward with the UNDP. Thank you very much. I don't think I can. I've just been told, incidentally, that drinks are on their way. So if you want to finish the day with a bit of a drink and a chat, just hang about. Be there in a couple of minutes.
Climate solutions, fast and fair.